Chapter 8, Lunchtime. Being a helper is not a breeze. After the lunch bell rang, big kids started coming into the kitchen. 2 of them pointed at my hairnet. They called me the name of Freakazoid. I felt very crumbling inside. Now I'm not even going to greet you, I said real quiet. After that, I tattletailed to Mrs. Gutzman, and she grouched at those boys. Plus also, she said I didn't have to greet people. Instead, she said I could sponge the counter. I hurried over there my fastest. Then I sponged and sponged until the big kids were gone. Pretty soon, I looked at the door again. Guess what? I saw my friends from room 1. I saw Herb and Lenny and Jose and Shirley and Roger, and they were at the counter with their trays. I ran over to them speedy quick. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Look at me. See me working in here? I am being a helper. See, I said. All of them smiled and waved. Hi, Junie B. Hi, they said. I skipped around in a circle. See my outfit? I'm a real professional lunch maker. See, I look just like Mrs. Gutzman. I showed them my sponge, and look at this, I even have equipment. After that, I ran back to the sinks, and I showed them how I wiped the counter. Can everyone see me over here, I asked. I am the boss of this whole entire sponged area. Plus, after that, I zoomed to the napkins. And I'm also the boss of these napkins, I said. See how I stack them? If I keep up the good work, someday I will be the boss of this whole operation, possibly. Just then, May came into the door, and she did a mean laugh. You're not a real lunch maker, Junie B. Jones, she said. They're just letting you pretend. Don't you know that? All of a sudden, I felt steamy mad inside, because I'm sick and tired of that crazy girl. I stamped my foot real hard. Yes, I am too a real lunch maker, I said. Can't you even see my outfit, May? If I'm not a real lunch maker, then how come I'm wearing mitts and a hairnet, huh? May did not answer. I'll tell you why, sister, I said. Because I'm keeping hair and germs out of that tuna noodle stinkle, that's why.
Where's that behind
Behind me, I heard Mrs. Gutzman groan. I turned around to see her. Her face looked sickish. I turned back to room 1. Their faces looked sickish too. One by one, all of them put their lunch trays back. I don't really feel that hungry anymore, said Herb kind of quiet. Me neither, said Jose. I had a really big breakfast. Then very slowly all the children started backing out of the kitchen. I watched them from the door. They backed all the way out to our lunch table. Mr. Scary was waiting for them there, and he talked to them a minute, and then he came into the kitchen and talked to Mrs. Gutzman. They whispered to each other for a real long time. Also, they kept looking at me, and they wouldn't even stop. My head got drops of sweaty on it, and I wiped it off with my sponge. After that, Mrs. Gutzman closed her eyes again. Then she walked to me very nice, and she took away my sponge, and she said, my job was done. Chapter 9, Baloney. Dear First Grade Journal, Room 1 is still mad at me about Friday. After we went back to the room, Mrs. Gutzman brought bologna sandwiches for the children who didn't eat. They were not a hit. I sat at my desk and I ate out of my new lunchbox. I had a tasty peanut butter and jelly sandwich because brought lunch is better than a bought lunch. And that is not even my fault. Some of the children watched me eat. They made growly faces at me. Today, Herbert is my only friend. Also, Lenny and Jose are being reasonable. I wish Friday never happened. From Junie B, first grader. I peeked my eyes at the clock. It was almost 2:15. Just one more hour before I could go home. I tried to make the clock go faster with my eyes. It did not actually work that good. Just then there was a knock on the door. Mr. Scary answered it. Why, hello, he said. Why, hello yourself, said a friendly voice. And guess what? It was Mrs. Gutzman. She walked in the room with 2 boxes in her arms. My heart pounded and pounded to see that woman, because what if she came to scold me? I slumped way down in my seat so she couldn't see me. Mrs. Gutzman set the boxes on Mr. Scary's desk. Then she looked all around the room. I slumped in my seat even farther. Only too bad for me, because Blabbermouth May pointed at me. Mrs. Gutzman, she hollered. Junie Jones is sliding to hide from you. She is sliding down in her chair so you can't see her, but I'm keeping track of her movements. After that, I slid all the way down to the floor under my desk. I curled into a ball and hid my head. Pretty soon, I heard feet walking into my desk. I'm getting used to that sound. The feet stopped next to my chair. I opened one eye and peeked out. I saw the bottom of Mrs. Gutzman's white apron. Junie said her voice. Why are you sitting on the floor? I didn't move any muscles. Because maybe she would still go away, possibly. Junie B, said Mrs. Gutzman again, I brought you something for your class. Don't you want to see what it is? I shook my head real fast. No, thank you, I said. I don't want to see it, and so you can just be on your way now, please. I opened my other eye and looked at her feet. They kept on standing there, and then all of a sudden I heard a loud groan, and what do you know? That woman squatted right down next to me, and I was shocked to see her. Mrs. Gutzman, I said, what are you doing down here? Mrs. Gutzman did not look comfortable. Please, Junie B, I need your help, she said. I brought cookies for your class today, but there's no one up here to help me pass them out. I rolled my eyes way back in my head, because that was not even the truth, of course. Yes, there is, Mrs. Gutzman, I said. There are lots of people up there to help you. Mrs. Gutzman shook her head. No, you don't understand, she said. After that, she reached in her pocket and she pulled out a pair of plastic mitts. I need a real helper, Junie B. She said, I need someone with experience. Mrs. Gutzman smiled kind of painful. Please, she said, if we don't stand soon, I'm going to fall right on my keister, and you'll never get me up. I did a teensy smile because that was a little joke, I believe. Finally, I crawled out from my desk and I helped Mrs. Gutzman stand up. I guess I can help you pass out cookies, I said, kind of quiet, but some of these children are still very mad at me, you know. Mrs. Gutzman held my hand. Yes, well, I think maybe I can fix that, she said. After that, me and her walked to the front of the room together, and Mrs. Gutzman showed everyone the cookies. Sugar cookies, shouted the children. Thank you, Mrs. Gutzman, thank you. Mrs. Gutzman put her hand on my shoulder. Don't thank me, class, she said. Junie B. Jones is the one who reminded me to pay you a visit this year. She's the one you need to thank. For a second, no one said anything. Then all of a sudden, Herb hollered out, Thank you, Junie B. Jones! And then all the other children hollered too. Thank you, too! I grinned real big because those words felt happy in my ears. After that, I hurried back to the sink and I washed my hands, and then I put on my mitts and ran back. Mrs. Gutzman gave me a thumbs up. Ready to go, helper, she said. Ready to go, I said back. And so both of us passed out all the cookies together, and I did a perfect job. And so here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that maybe someday I won't be the boss of lunch after all. Maybe someday I will just be the boss of cookies instead. Because the boss of cookies is the most delicious job I ever heard of. Plus also, I will get to make all the cookie rules, and I have already thought of rule number 1. I wrote it in my journal so I won't forget. Rule number 1. The boss of cookies gets to have 5 sugar cookies all to herself. P.S. Only never eat them in front of the children, because that would be rude, probably. P.S. again. Plus, sometimes she can even eat 6. Ha! The end. We hope you've enjoyed